Give it up for AOC. She knows how to flip-flop and be a hypocrite. Because remember, I played on yesterday's show AOC talking about how we need to be careful and we need to have the U.S. put conditional military aid to Israel. Right? She talked about it. She talked about conditional aid to Israel. And then she has the audacity to say before Congress that we need more money for Ukraine. So money for this war, but no money for that war. Either you're anti-war or you're not. AOC, I do remember how you ran your campaign in 2018. And I get it. You're part of the Democratic Party. But is it impossible? Is it truly impossible for you to be consistent on anything? So first, folks, let's play this recent video that happened. AOC in Congress at a committee hearing begging for more money for Ukraine because we haven't spent enough on it already.
Dr. Snyder, your opening was, I think, very illuminating as to the connections here between different geopolitical theaters and how we can make sure that we continue to defend democracy, both domestically in the United States, but also globally. I wanted to touch a little bit briefly on and pick up a little bit, very briefly, on your exchange with Representative Khanna here in what you assessed as a mistake in tying Ukraine to the conflict in Gaza. And also presently, as you mentioned, the necessity of passing aid to Ukraine as quickly as possible. Could you speak a little bit, expand a little bit more on where you see that entanglement or detriment in tying the conflict in Ukraine with what is happening in Gaza and with the Netanyahu's government's decisions to advance in Gaza, and how?
Isn't it incredible? This is a U.S. House representative that managed to swindle and trick so many progressives into thinking she's a fighter. Help me fund this war, but don't help me fund that war. Hey, we need to put more money for Ukraine, but this thing in Israel, no money for there. It's either you're anti-war or you're not. And by the way, just so you know, AOC, you got Zelensky who's still begging for more money, saying he stands with Israel too. Do you want to add any 2 cents onto that, AOC? Do you want to add anything to that? And by the way, you have many colleagues in your own party that want to fund both wars through and through.
The U.S. relates to both of those things differently.
On the issue of Gaza and Ukraine, I'll be as specific as I can. As I read it in late 2023, in a different political context than the one we're in now, and in a different stage of the war in Gaza than the one we're in now, the Biden administration made a political calculation that bringing Israel and Ukraine together would be the most likely way to get people from both sides of the aisle to vote for a substantial bill. I believe that was the reason at the time. I was not party to those considerations. However, months later, with 2 other things having happened, the first being that the war in Israel has gone through several stages in the meantime and are having gotten past any place where the Israeli military response is going to lead to a political solution. And secondly, the extreme difficulty in getting Ukraine aid to pass in any form. Those 2 things change the overall political situation. For me, who's not in the legislature and not in the executive branch, what I see is the qualitative difference between the 2 events. That Russia invading Ukraine objectively aids the Chinese position in profound ways, which their political warriors try to exploit. But it also threatens world order in ways that are essential to the United States and to its European partners. Whereas the conflict in Gaza is a horrifying terrorist operation, which must lead to some kind of political solution. It won't be solved militarily.
Wow, thanks for that word salad, Professor. Or either that, maybe it's the fact what's happening in Gaza is because of the policies implemented by the apartheid government in Israel. The fact that there are military operations targeting men, women, and children in civilian centers there, and maybe that's what's building up the resentment, 75 plus years of destruction and insanity. And then, of course, you have this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where in 2014, the United States helped implement a coup, do a regime change there, cause political instability. And of course, hey, you have a couple of U.S. politicians investing in the rich natural gas and other fossil fuels that are in Ukraine. And oh boy, what a coincidence it was that somehow Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was involved in a lot of those shenanigans there. Heaven forbid that U.S. interests there would help, I don't know, fire up a potential conflict that was brewing between Ukraine and Russia that has now led to this crisis that we are seeing firsthand as people are dying.
Thank
my
you.
assessment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder. And I think what you laid out so clearly there and in your opening as well is that the core and the key that we have here is in support geopolitically instability, is in supporting Ukraine in this moment, having U.S. military assistance and broader global assistance to Ukraine should be one of our top geopolitical priorities, because it is the key in defending democracy geopolitically, whether your interest is in China, whether the interest is in anywhere else there. All of the focus here is in Ukraine and in supporting and ensuring that Putin.
Pause it in time. Putin. The Russians are coming. Here comes Putin. We gotta send more money. Send more people to die on the front line. They lowered the recruiting age now, or the drafting age, to the age of 25. They're gonna have to lower it down even more because so many men are dying at the front. And in war, let's face it, it is an everlasting grinding machine. When this conflict does end, there should be I hope there will be people who will do studies of how this will impact the future generations in that region, and potentially why this whole war was a waste in the first place. Controversial in the statement in a 3, 2, 1. Would it have been that difficult to have diplomatic peace talks? Would it have been that difficult to maybe avoid this conflict?
And an authoritarian regime in Russia does not prevail in changing the geopolitical order, rule of law, and functioning democracy worldwide. And
before the invasion, there were plenty of articles from The Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post, and a lot of other corporate media outlets who covered stories about Ukraine's government being, so horrifically corrupt. Heaven forbid we actually see continuation of those government officials being corrupt. I wonder if AOC is ever going to look into the fact that many of these leading ministers who are so sinister buying rich villas, these wonderful pieces of property in Europe, these nice beachfront properties, which they can relax and lay their head because they're so stressed, because they're so tired, right? Because you have all these politicians there in Ukraine who are also, maybe pocketing some money on the side. AOC, why are you so insistent of giving more money to something that's right now pointless? You were giving money to a corrupt government that's sending young men to die on the front line. Bullshit.
Frankly, I think it's important from my vantage point on the second point is that anything that impedes the swiftness and the urgency of our ability to get that support to Ukraine is overall contributing to the volatility of our situation. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
She said a whole lot of nothing there. But what does final victory look like? Because Russia has control of a good portion of Ukraine. And they're building up their defenses. They're already preparing for another counterstrike. They are moving forward with their military operations. Now, again, this all could have been avoided. Clearly, it could have been. But AOC, since you're so keen on giving so much money there, what does a true victory look like? The more this conflict goes on, there's a potential worst case scenario that it starts to heat up. Already you have European leaders talking about putting in their own ground forces in Ukraine. For what? I don't know, unless the European Union, NATO, the USA, we finally start the sequel we've all been waiting for, World War III. Maybe instead of escalating the conflict, we do something called de-escalation, call for a ceasefire. But that's a bridge too far for AOC because it's Putin, and somehow Putin and his boogie men somehow did election tampering in 2016 that caused Hill Dog to lose to Donald Trump.
All of the hostile and Russia and Chinese observers and political warriors want this to drag out as long as possible and praise those who make it drag out. So of course my answer would be in the affirmative. The front in Ukraine is threatened in ways it doesn't have to be. The population is threatened in ways it doesn't have to be. This is a relatively easy war for us to influence in the correct way.
You heard that right. It's relatively an easy war for us to influence in the correct way. Let's play that again.
And praise those who make it drag out. So of course my answer would be in the affirmative. The front in Ukraine is threatened in ways it doesn't have to be. The population is threatened in ways it doesn't have to be. This is a relatively easy war for us to influence.
So all those people dying, it's an easy war for us to influence. Just remember that all wars are easy.
In the correct way. It matters to us for all the reasons that you've given, and we ought to do so as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Snyder.
Now, AOC, what were you saying to Hassan here?
And you talked about enabling. Our enabling constitutes mainly arms sales. It's a big part of our enabling. Number one, did you ever imagine that Nancy Pelosi would come out for conditions on arms sales of all people? And number two, post this weekend with the Iranian attack on Israel, what are you saying to colleagues who say, well, of course we have to arm Israel now? What are you saying to the Jared Moskowitz's and Josh Gottheimers?
Well, on your first note, I do think it's important for people to take a pause and realize how much of a dramatic sea change there has been. The mere notion or suggestion of conditioning U.S. military aid to Israel was unthinkable.
And that's not going to happen. That was just Nancy Pelosi off her meds, AOC. You know Mama Bear. Come on. That she ain't no spring chicken. She just said something and then realized, uh-oh, I need to get that APAC check again. Sorry, I was being senile. Let me get another martini and some ice cream. Here's AOC's hypocrisy. Funding one war, but saying no to another war, when in fact the U.S. government and Congress has been voting and trying to do everything they can to fund both at the same time.
7 months ago. Politically unthinkable. Never in the history of the United States have we had a conversation like this. And the fact that, as you mentioned, that even Nancy Pelosi is now signing on to letters about this, we have to understand this is a generational change.
Yep.
Secondly, as to your second point, what we say to folks who resist this is that if we want safety in this region, we have to condition U.S. military aid, which we do to every country in the world, by the way. It's actually stopping the exemptions instead of creating one that we're talking about. And it's the creation of this exemption that has contributed, in my view, to destabilizing the region. Because when we say you can do anything you want with this, and as we've seen when there are...
So just to do a quick YouTube rewind, remember what this old professor was saying to AOC's question.
All of the hostile and Russia and Chinese observers and political warriors want this to drag out as long as possible and praise those who make it drag out. So of course my answer would be in the affirmative. The front in Ukraine is threatened in ways it doesn't have to be. The population is threatened in ways it doesn't have to be. This is a relatively easy war for us to influence in the correct way. It matters to us for all the reasons that you've given, and we ought to do so as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Snyder.
So she was pleased with that answer. But right here, just a few days ago, she said something different.
Leaders in the region stopping the exemptions instead of creating one that we're talking about. And it's the creation of this exemption that has contributed, in my view, to destabilizing the region. Because when we say you can do anything you want with this, And as we've seen, when there are leaders in the region who will do and will break international law and norms, we are having a hand in that. And the good news about it is that I do believe, I hope, that we are getting to a point where this is no longer a fringe position.
Do you worry that Israel, as a critic of Israel, do you worry that Israel is trying to start a war in the Middle East to distract from Gaza, trying to start a war with Iran? There was the attack on the consulate in Syria, which the Iranians claimed they were retaliating for. How worried are you about an Israel-Iran war that America gets dragged to, that Biden gets dragged into?
I can't speak to the intent. I don't know if it is volatile decision-making. It is difficult to generally get into the mind of not just one individual, but a cabinet, a government that has its own internal incentives.
She's just struggling, just trying to come up with a good word salad answer. Because the answer is yes, Israel is trying to cause a distraction. Please disregard the screaming of men, women, and children in Gaza and focus on this. Oh my goodness, Iran's attacking us.
As well, that they are responding to within the politics of Israel as well. But what I do know is that this is not safe. And what I do know is that whether intentionally or unintentionally, this is an escalatory environment. And our responsibility, in my belief, is to contribute to the de-escalation of what is a very volatile situation. And I believe the president made some actions this weekend, and it actually showed and demonstrated the value of conditions, saying we will not support this.
So how do we end this segment? Let's at least cleanse our palate with the words from Sabby Sab in regards to talking about AOC. AOC donated money to the DCCC to further a political career. AOC voted for funding in Ukraine. AOC supported regime change in Venezuela, betrayed railroad workers. She does just enough to keep her grassroots base while supporting Democratic leaders. Give it up for Sabby Sab. Sabby, please, give a firm smack to AOC's mouth.
Does he have a point? Does AOC have a point that there are real risks to democracy here that are worth her giving this money over to the Democrats?
She didn't have to be the one to donate that money to the DCCC. That money could have come from any member of Congress. She did this to secure her political career within the Democratic Party. That is what I firmly believe. This is something that she said that she would not do. But the political game that she plays is that she appears to be just progressive enough. She'll do certain things to appear to be just progressive enough to still maintain some of her progressive base and some of the support that she had from the grassroots base. But then she'll also support the corporate wing of the Democratic Party so that she can solidify her political career within the party. And I want to break that down. Some of the ways that she supported some of the progressive actions is she's against AIPAC. So she's a part of this coalition to reject AIPAC. But people have to remember that affects her directly because AIPAC has put up a lot of money against her and other members of the squad to get them out of Congress. So there's that piece. She has called them out, which I support. I think AIPAC should register as a foreign agent. I'm not in support of AIPAC either. But she's called out Republican donors that are attached to AIPAC and Republican Party members that are attached to AIPAC. But she hasn't called out people like Hakeem Jeffries that very much takes a lot of money from AIPAC, or people like Richie Torres. I believe Ilhan Omar has called out Richie Torres, AOC not so much. So she's not willing again to call out the establishment members of the Democratic Party because she wants to continue to have a political career. She is finally calling Israel's assault on Gaza a genocide after being pushed to do so by protesters. So there's that. However, this is where she still supports the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. Although she did that, she's calling Gaza genocide. She has endorsed Joe Biden, who is complicit with the genocide in Gaza.
And that's important to point out. AOC had to be pushed by protesters. AOC had to have her feet to the fire because, oh my goodness gracious, she was being called out by her progressive base, the progressive base that felt that she abandoned them. And she did. AOC and the squad effectively abandoned us. But don't tell that to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Jamal Bowman or Rashida Tlaib. That's why they're still begging people to please support them against AIPAC. But yet, this is the same AOC who's going to endorse Joe Biden, who is pro-war in Ukraine, pro-Israel. They're not going to stop the funding. Right now, Congress is struggling to get this bill passed in order to fund Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine. And you know AOC is going to follow orders. You know she's not going to be a protest vote. She's going to vote in favor of it. She's going to vote in favor for ongoing war, or either that. Let's say she votes against it. You know she's still going to stand in solidarity with Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chucky Boy Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. She's going to do that. Why? Because she's a Democrat. She was never, ever going to fight for us.
If AOC cared so passionately about helping the Palestinian people, why doesn't AOC advocate for supporting a third party or independent candidate that is against the genocide and that is for self-determination of the Palestinian people? She could rally her base immediately by telling people we all need to get behind Jill Stein. And I say Jill Stein because she has the most ballot access, just reality. And we could actually have a huge third-party movement in this country, but she doesn't want that to happen. She's going along with Dem leadership. She voted against the railroad workers' strike. See, people forget this. This was her turning against labor. She voted for funding for the war in Ukraine. She abolished ICE off of her website. That was one of the big things that she ran on. And a lot of people forget this as well. She supported regime change in Venezuela. But this is not something a leftist or a progressive should support, the regime changes abroad. And I don't remember the last time I heard AOC talk about Medicare for all either. That's another thing. So she's doing just enough to continue to say that she's still progressive and try to hold on to some of that progressive base. But when you look at the way that AOC is voting, she's still very much in line with the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. And I believe that's to further her political career.
And leave it up to Sabby to give a 1-2 punch. Jesus Christ, Sabby, take it easy. Take it easy.